Buenos dias, bonjour, guten tag, and a hearty Australian g'day mate. In other words, hello and welcome, since some of you are in very different time zones. I'm Paul Menig, and I've spent my career developing teams to create, develop, and support high-tech products for military, aerospace, industrial automation, medical, and automotive industries. I've been an intrapreneur at General Electric, Eaton, and Daimler. I've been employee number one in a new business unit, and I've been one of the leaders in a company of 275,000. My teams have worked on breast scanners and cardiac monitors, self-guided bombs and nuclear reactors, programmable logic controllers and sensors, semiconductor processing equipment and radar systems, engines, transmissions, brakes, telematics, and human interface devices. I've had to make sure they were designed right from the start and help the factory produce and program the products correctly. I've been in the field to obtain customer orders and suffered the complaints when things broke. I've also worked with hundreds of smaller companies, both startups and lifestyle. With all that, I've been thinking like this futuristic thinking man. I'd like to share with you my thoughts on aligning 7 forces to accelerate your business. Even the big boys fail. J.C. Penney hired someone from Apple to help accelerate growth that was stagnant. Instead, the company has spiraled downward. That CEO is out in a short time, and a new one with more retail experience has been brought in. Sears has been around for over 125 years. A decade ago, it merged with Kmart. Today, its future is in jeopardy. Target just recently decided to sell off its Canadian business, retrenching from where it had expanded. This last week, Radio Shack filed for bankruptcy protection. 14 years ago, Enron went bankrupt after its accounting fraud was uncovered. The fallout from that failure created the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, which has had significant impact on the daily lives of employees in many companies. Kodak is another company over 125 years old, a proverbial technology-based company with a history of innovation that missed an important step along the way. They've come out of bankruptcy, but what next? GM is continually facing problems, loss of market share year after year for decades, bankruptcy with major help from the government. Then, just when the market is returning in a blaze, they face challenges from recalls of millions of vehicles. Most of you don't know United Streetcar from here in my hometown of Portland. Its former president was elevated to Deputy Secretary of Commerce for Manufacturing 2 years ago. But that does not bring in orders. In December, the new president left, and they went into what they call hibernation. If we turn to smaller businesses, the situation is not much better. The Small Business Administration defines a small manufacturing business as one with less than 500 employees. For non-manufacturing businesses, they define a small business as one with less than about $10 million in average sales. The list is classic government, with exceptions up to 1,500 employees and $38.5 million in sales. According to the government, there are 23 million such small businesses, accounting for 54% of all U.S. sales and 55% of all jobs. With all of that humanity at stake, it's disappointing that only 60% of companies survive for 5 years, and it drops to less than 1 in 4 surviving for 15 years. I was lucky enough to talk to one of the survivors recently, a $1 million per year sign-making company with 3 full-time employees in addition to the 2 owners that has been in business for 16 years now. If we turn our attention to the people that dream of making it big by starting the next Facebook or Groupon, the results and the impact to people is even worse. It's wonderful that our country continues to encourage the idea that anyone can make it big. But for the 10 investments that are made by angels and venture capitalists, half of them are going to be at a loss, probably not returning any money. Many of these startups fail fast, often within the first 3 years. About 4 of the investments will return the investors money and likely a modest return. When these investors sprinkle their money around, they look for that one idea that will result in a return of more than 10 times their investment. I say sprinkle because that's an important part of the process. Whereas most people invest in mutual funds to reduce the risk of a single stock declining, the angel investors need to invest in multiple companies to spread their risk around. Some academic studies suggest that the optimum number of investments for an angel investor is about 20 to 30 companies over time with regular investments. That's their form of dollar cost averaging. That's a lot of dollars. A more recent way to get your idea to market is through crowdfunding. This started out as a way to get donations from people for your idea. In the last few years, it became a great way of testing the market and getting your customer to pay for development. Basically, companies put their idea out there and see if people will pay for it, and pay for it up front. The biggest offering to date brought in over $13 million from over 62,000 people that wanted the product badly. Personally, I don't have much use for a battery-powered cooler with integrated blender for mixing margaritas. It's too bad the people asking for the money did not have much knowledge of what it takes to develop a product and deliver it on time. 4 months after they took everyone's money, they had to admit they would not be able to deliver on time, and they needed to upgrade the product. Yeah, right. Upgrade it to working is what I think. The next step for crowdfunding has started in several states. Instead of people paying up front for a product that is to be delivered, now people can invest dollars with the expectation of getting equity in the company. No longer do you have to be a qualified investor with lots of money and some level of knowledge of the risks involved. I can only expect we will see more failures that impact the lives of people. I'm sure everyone listening has some ideas as to why businesses fail, why specific projects fail. This is just one list that someone has published. You and I might have our own lists. I think there are 2 categories. The first is poor execution. Whether you are a sole proprietor or a company with tens of thousands of employees, it's a challenge to get every step right, to execute flawlessly time and time again. But I'd say there is a bigger category of failure. You can execute flawlessly and still fail. Some of those companies on the first slide executed flawlessly, but still ran into trouble. Why? Because they planned poorly. Poor planning is why so many startups fail. It's why so many small companies fail. Even in spite of the many smart people in the large companies, it's why they run into trouble and fail. That's because there is a lot more to putting together a good plan than many think. I'd like to dispel what I consider a myth. Recently, I watched a program on successful startups on our local PBS station. One woman had developed a successful business, making stylish cases that carried everything a woman wants as well as her computer gear. She said she made a plan when she started, and then never looked at it again. I've also heard some serial entrepreneurs say they don't believe in a plan and never write one. The truth is, they at least have a plan in their heads. They tell other employees what is important based on what they think. They develop a website based on what they are thinking. They have a plan, in my opinion. They just don't want to be held accountable. Here are 7 reasons for somehow documenting your plan. First, your plan is looking out at who are the competitors. This comes easy to most companies, with the possible exception of people doing startups. Too often they say their idea is brand new and they have no competition. The truth is their competition is the customer doing nothing. Plans help you to prioritize what needs to be done and where you need to put your money. Plans look outward at the external influences that can either help or hurt your company. Your plan gives you a chance to evaluate the shifting sands that represent risks to your company. Nearly as important as prioritization is alignment of the thoughts, goals, and actions of everyone in the company. And that's the prelude to being able to have the flawless execution that you outline in the plan with milestones. And important to every business is finding funding. Even the largest company in the world, Apple, needs money. They recently raised $6.5 billion selling corporate bonds with a 5-year term at rates as low as 1.55%. That's significantly below the current 3.25% prime rate. Their business plan is not some dusty document on parchment stored in a wooden filing cabinet. It's in every commercial, every web page, every product description, their annual report, and every stock analyst presentation. You've seen it. You may not have recognized it as a business plan. So, you can understand that there are many people interested in your plan. Apple and the other large companies have to impress the stock analysts so that they write positively about your company and recommend the purchase of your stocks and bonds to investors. Your plan also serves to inform and guide the people inside the company, such as your board of directors and your employees. You have to tell your suppliers where you are going and what you are planning so that they can prepare and in many cases help to develop your products and services. Your customers want to know what you are up to. They want to know what you have, what's important to you, and what your next product will be. Finally, the biggest stakeholder in the plan is you, because it guides your every decision and action. To create or update a plan, the place to start is with gathering data. In some cases, lots of data. The trick is to turn that data into useful information that you can understand and that provides insight into your business and the world around you. Then you can use that information to make decisions about where you are and where you want to go in 1 year or 3 years or 10 years. So, what data, what information do you need for your plan? Let's discuss 7 areas that are like forces acting on your business. Technology is a big game changer for everyone. The triangular ruler represents the Bronze Age, when hand tools moved our human race up the ladder of intelligence. The tractor represents the industrial age that significantly propelled us past human physical power. And, of course, the tablet represents the information age that we are living in now. Technology has continually changed the world and created opportunities for companies. Not only does technology impact you, it impacts your suppliers. Your product developments are often based on new technology. Your customers are looking for something new or of better quality that technology enables. You use it in your own factories and decrease your costs. Your sales and marketing team uses it to improve their efficiency, get your message out, and better understand the needs of the customer. Finance continually improves how it measures your progress, cash flow, and balance sheet. And just think how technology has impacted how you work in your office. This webinar being just one small example of the impact of technology. Another area is market constraints and government regulations. Market constraints are things like standards of your industry that are not government regulations. A good example is ISO accreditation and Underwriters Lab or UL approvals. Another is trade associations that might put requirements on its members regarding their behavior and complaint resolution processes, such as the Better Business Bureau or the Chamber of Commerce. Public companies may have to face shareholder monitoring services like institutional shareholder services and environmental organizations. On the government side, you may have authorizations for your product from the Food and Drug Administration, or the Federal Communications Commission, or the Environmental Protection Agency. You may have to meet certain label requirements, whether it is food, or a car, or postings in your cafeteria. I just learned that a decade ago, A trade association had to apply to the FDA to relabel or rebrand prunes to be dried plums. The many tax rules will not only drive you crazy, but will drive you to actions, such as large corporations keeping their cash in foreign countries and local companies choosing to locate in special economic development zones. Finally, governments everywhere have an idea of where the world should go, and they provide incentives to take you in that direction. One thing about competition, it better exist. You don't want to be accused of collusion or otherwise risk antitrust lawsuits and penalties. And don't believe you have no competition. At the very least, your customer can choose to do nothing, which is a lot like competition having a different value improvement proposition than you. I like this image of competitors circling you like a shiver of sharks. It should make you shiver too. It may be that the one competitor you focus on is not the one that ends up winning the battle, because they all attack you, taking a bite out of your market share. You have direct competitors that you can easily name. You also have indirect competitors. For instance, a competitor to a pool hall is a bowling alley. A competitor to car ownership is mass transit, taxis, Uber, and car-sharing services. You need to understand what the market drivers are for your competitors. It could be cost, or quality, or growth, or trying to pump up their value for an IPO and an exit strategy for the founders. Getting the data on your competitors can take some effort that goes well beyond looking at things on the internet. What value messages are your competitors using to approach your customers? Is it cost, or quality, or time, or image? You also need to benchmark your entire operation against your competitors. In the automotive world, Toyota, General Motors, and Volkswagen know well what each spends on R&D, sales incentives, and how long each car takes to produce. Finally, don't forget the tiniest new guy. This is the classic issue of a competitor coming out of nowhere to completely change the business model. It's streaming of TV shows taking out the need for video recorders. It's the internet and digital magazines taking out hard copy magazines. Most of us travel. Notice how few newspapers and magazines are laying around the airport. I'm a huge believer that everyone in the organization needs to understand the end customer and the distribution channels that your product or service has to go through to get there. An obvious piece of data is what value does your end customer and those in the distribution chain place on your product or service. That often depends on the pain they feel. For instance, the hassle to complete customer reports for salespeople gave rise to Salesforce as a product or service. There used to be discussion of the 4 P's of product, price, promotion, and placement. Today, the focus is on providing solutions to our customers that take us into adjacent product opportunities. Price has not changed. Promotion is now more about educating the customer than giving them a hard sell, though the loud sellers on late-night TV commercials have not figured that out. And placement is now more about providing access to the product. When a Borders brick-and-mortar store is replaced by digital downloads from Amazon or iTunes, it's all about access. I was working at a bar during happy hour when a salesman for Canon equipment struck up a conversation with me. He mentioned a good book on sales called The Challenger Sale. I looked it up on iTunes and purchased before he finished talking. The last thing I want to mention is the work you need to put into figuring out how you are going to get data on your customers and the distribution chain. The situation is similar and more complicated on the supply side. You have services represented by the food tray. These are janitorial services, software as a service, legal advice, payroll services, and more. The box with the label on it represents boxes or pallets or truckloads of parts that come into your factory. The old-fashioned floppy disk represents the digital data and information that comes in, probably the most important one being an order. The filing box represents all the other supplies that come in, such as paper and ink for copiers, food for the break room, or oil for machines. A big question for every business is, what will you do yourself and what will you outsource? Do you want to do payroll? Do you want to cut your own grass or clean your own toilets? Do you want to deal with hazardous materials for coatings on metal? What criteria will you use for deciding this question? What criteria will you use for selecting the suppliers that you use? You also have to decide if you will have short-term or long-term agreements, and if you will have multiple suppliers to be able to leverage them in some way. What is the strategy you will use for your supply chain? Packaging and shipping is as much an issue on the incoming side as the outgoing side. Will you have returnable cartons? Will you demand recyclable cardboard be used? Will you sell off wooden pallets for money? Quality of your incoming products and services will reflect directly on your company. What changes are your suppliers implementing that will impact you? Do you even know what they are? This is a huge issue in automotive, aerospace, and medical, where a change can have dramatic financial consequences in warranty and can endanger a life. Do you want a single source for a variety of services? Or do you want to be your own general purchasing agent? I can't count the number of times in the corporate world where purchasing had decided we would all use one office supply house and negotiated a favorable contract, but some employee found another place with cheaper rates or the exact product they wanted. How many times have you made a plan that you would say required perfect execution, like a baseball home run hit out of the park? How many times did that happen? There are so many things that can disrupt your business. Your plan needs to consider these possibilities. The most obvious, and one often overlooked, is weather. Every year we lose school days to snow and ice. Businesses, even if they stay open, lose workers because they have to be home with their children. Supply disruptions can be caused by a bridge going out or a fire, as I had to deal with for air hoses when a plant in Germany was destroyed. When the tsunami hit Japan in 2011, it was more than 6 months' effort to deal with the supply issues. What happens if a key employee gets sick for a few days, or worse, is diagnosed with cancer, or is hit by a car? All of these have happened to me in my career. The auto companies know the disruption that occurs from a recall, but it's not just them. Keurig, the coffee maker company, suffered tremendous disruption due to a recall for water spitting at people. Apple and Samsung and others have wasted huge amounts of time and money on patent litigations, both reasonable ones and spurious ones. What happens if an employee files a lawsuit for harassment, or a shareholder files one against the board of directors? Are you ready to handle a scandal if your CEO is found embezzling or walking around the factory in his skivvies like Dov Charney at American Apparel? How about Brian Williams of ABC misremembering what was done or said? Now that you have a good picture of what is happening all around your company on the outside, it's time to look at your internal activities. First and foremost, everyone talks about the culture of your organization. Your culture is captured in your vision and mission statements. Your values and long-term goals are important to motivating your workforce. Your short-term objectives will obviously affect what you do. Most companies say that their people are the most important part of the company. What are your plans for developing people, motivating them, and rewarding them? Next is your product development activities and your product costs. What are you working on, and what are your cost objectives? Your processes need to be continually improved to drive cost out and improve quality by all of its measures. With that, you can determine what your operating budget is going to be. If you're small, it may be for just the next year, while if you are a Fortune 100 company, it could be a 5-year or longer forecast. Closely related to that is your plans for investing in capital expansions and the cost of capital for process improvements. What we've just done is review the 7 forces that can either hold back your company or can be aligned to accelerate your company toward growth and increased profits. Technology affects your company as well as your suppliers and your distribution chain, and really, everyone. Similarly, everyone has to deal with market constraints and government regulations. You need to understand how you get your products to market and what is happening in your supply base. You should know what can disrupt your business and how your competitors are behaving. Then you can turn internally to consider your people, products, and processes. In the engineering world I was schooled in, everything seems to be able to be simplified to the equation F equals ma, where the resultant force is equal to the mass of the object multiplied by its acceleration. I think in the business world we can use the same equation. If we align these 7 forces that we've discussed, the financials of the business will be equal to the management action that will accelerate our businesses to growth and increase profits. F equals ma. Think about it. Now, let's talk about putting together the plan itself. Size matters. As a company grows, it adds employees. Sales and profits better grow in some relationship to the number of people in the company. Most industries have a key performance metric related to the sales per employee. As I look at companies of various sizes, I see an average of about $100,000 in sales revenue per person. It's higher for an intellectual property company like Qualcomm and lower for a restaurant. Similarly, profits should be proportional to your size. Many would love to have profits of 10% of sales, and some do. One comment I'd like to make is that on the left, the small entrepreneurial startup is focused on the blue sky opportunity to make it big, while the companies on the right are focused on managing the downside risk to their company and struggle with growth. On the left, growth is measured in huge multiples of sales, while on the right, growth is measured in single to double-digit percentages. Another way of looking at this is what level of management is needed at each stage. To put this into perspective, many people have spent some time in the armed forces. In the Army, a squad of 10 is headed by a sergeant. A company of 100 is headed by a captain. A brigade of a few thousand is headed by a colonel, and a division of 10,000 is headed by a 2-star major general, which is a lower rank than a general with 4 stars. Let me briefly explain how this plays out for each of the 7 forces. I'm going to highlight a company of the relative size of 100 because there is a theory that businesses of about 150 persons are ideal. Large companies are always composed of smaller units. Plants are often sized to be about 150 persons. In the area of technology, the single-person company is focused on getting the product out. They may have spent time early on figuring out what was happening in technology, but now they have to get it done. When you reach the size of 100, I find that people want to be looking at technology, but they have limited capacity to do it. Often they have some ideas, but all they can afford to do is have some people work on it part-time. By the time you are a Fortune 100 company with tens of thousands of employees, you have a dedicated group of people that work exclusively on innovation and research new products and technology. In the area of market constraints and government, often the single-person company does not even know all the standards of the industry. By the time you are 100 persons strong, you're typically participating in standards, but not driving them. The Fortune 100 companies form their own associations like the Geneva Alliance for Automotive Entertainment Systems or the Bluetooth Special Interest Group for portable devices. I can tell you that people with great ideas regularly approach investors and say they have no competition. They are dead wrong. At the very least, their customer may not understand the issue and choose to do nothing. Therefore, at the minimum, the competition is your customer ignoring your product or service and keeping their money to themselves. When you are 100 persons strong, others have seen the opportunity as well and are fighting with you regularly. You know them well. As you get larger, you probably have people tracking every press release and new product introduction of the competitors. As you get even larger, you'll be involved in tearing down the competitors' products and reverse engineering them to benchmark your own products. In the area of sales and marketing, when you reach 100 persons, you have a good understanding of your customers. While you may have many, you are likely to know a good deal about the top 20% because they often provide 80% of your revenue. For them, you can easily provide a template of what is happening with that customer and her challenges. If you are a company like Procter & Gamble, you are running analytics on Twitter feeds to find the people that can most influence people to buy your products based on authentic testimonials. With your vendors, by the time you reach 100 persons, you are now important to them and they to you. You're much more likely to have signed contracts with performance requirements rather than buying as needed when you were smaller. As you grow, you'll move toward agreements with regular review dates and move to long-term agreements of 3 or more years. In the area of disruption, at 100 persons you have a few plans. For instance, I'll bet the fire department requires you to have an evacuation plan and maybe even run a fire drill once a year. Maybe you have a phone number for employees to call when there is the possibility that snow or ice will shut down operations. Maybe you know where you will go in an emergency if you get overloaded on a machine, or worse, it breaks down and can't be repaired for a few days. When you are a multinational company, you are likely to have quarterly reviews of anything that can impact your finances by more than $250,000 or some number. You have a specific plan of what to do if your internet service goes down, or worse, you are hacked. So much of the large corporate world is dedicated to risk management. That's why they struggle with innovation and trying new things. Internally, at 100 persons, you are likely to have a few initiatives. For instance, some companies of this size that I've visited recently are working to obtain ISO approval for their manufacturing and quality systems. They are working to replace their outdated enterprise resource planning system or creating their own in-house IT department. When you are more than 10,000 people, you have multiple priorities and have to deal with helping your employees understand that you really can have a company focused on multiple things. That gives you a brief background on where companies of each size typically are in dealing with the 7 forces. It's time now to take all the useful information you've garnered from stacks of data, make decisions on where you are, where you want to be in the future, and plan how your company is going to get there. A company that is a single person making a food product to sell at the farmer's market is not going to need the same level of planning as the Fortune 100 company with tens of thousands of employees and multiple business units. Regardless of your size, though, there are certain elements that must be in your plan, no matter what form it takes, be it in your head, on your website, in an infographic poster, or in a huge PowerPoint deck with spreadsheets. You'll need an executive summary to quickly get the message across, just like a 15-second commercial during the Super Bowl. You need something about the industry and the market you serve. You need to understand your unique selling proposition and your current product portfolio. You should include a competitive analysis, your market strategy, and some financial key performance indicators. If you are a sole proprietor company, the first question is if you plan to get really big and sell out someday, or you plan to work this business for the rest of your life, put your children through college, and retire. If you are a growth-oriented startup, you need quite a few pieces of information to attract both customers and investors. You need to describe the pain or the problem that customers have and you are solving. You'll need to clearly define your customer. You'll likely need a video of some sort for crowdfunding campaigns or angel network applications. You'll need some milestones for the business. You'll define the growth plans, that classic hockey stick blue sky opportunity. You'll need to identify how you are going to exit the business, either with an IPO or being purchased by an Apple, Best Buy, or Capstone Capital. And since investors invest in people as much as the idea, you're going to need a stellar personal resume. On the other hand, if you are a lifestyle business, your needs are a bit simpler, but you're still going to need to attract some money. It may be friends and family, or it may be a bank, or even a lending club of private investors. Where you plan to locate and why, what your personal experience is that makes it possible for you to succeed are important. Are you going to be a sole proprietor, an LLC, an S corporation, or something else becomes more important? As you get bigger, you need a few more elements in your plan. When you have tens of people, you'll need information on your management team and a board of advisors. You'll need to detail what you need in your next funding round, its timing, and how it affects the prior investors. You'll need to explain more about your key existing customers and what new products or services you need to satisfy them more. Investors will want to know if others can easily duplicate what you have done, so the status of your intellectual property and development of your brand are important. For the lifestyle business, it's a bit simpler with needing information for dealing with others in the business. If you've got more than one partner now, the operating agreement is crucial. To both protect yourself and keep everyone working together smoothly, you'll need something detailing expectations of your employees. For instance, a small jewelry shop we frequent has less than 10 people, but they needed a statement on employee dress in order to position themselves to dismiss someone. When you have 100 employees or more, you have a big step in overhead associated with the business. This drives additional needs for your plan. It's also the time when you may decide if you are a private company or are you going to be a public company. To provide for the future and your employees, this becomes an important consideration. For this size of company, you are likely to begin benchmarking your performance against other companies in your industry to understand where you can improve. It may be done one-on-one with similar companies, or it could be through a trade association. For instance, the Spring Manufacturers Institute has over 200 member companies whose median size is less than $10 million in sales. Every year they do a survey of the membership to give everyone some financial metrics for comparison. This size company should be describing its management team and its board of directors, not just advisors. They should be carefully looking at the balance of skills and backgrounds that are needed on both. They should detail their supplier strategy and have a quality policy and plan. At this stage, they should be detailing their needs for research, even if they cannot spend much time and money on the subject. They are looking more to the future and what it takes to keep the business going and growing. Clearly, at this stage, what benefits you provide employees is critical. You can't just give them equity and hope anymore. When your company has more than 1,000 employees, you are probably a public company or required to meet certain oversight requirements. Issues of risk to the business become much more important. Your skills in running the business are more sophisticated. When you run financials, you're likely to look at the sensitivity of the numbers to changes in customer demand, supply-side costs, and the economics of the country. You'll likely set your goals based on looking at both optimistic and pessimistic financials, choosing something between the two. You're likely to have split the business into different segments and have some employees that are extremely key. You'll consider some aspects of succession planning for them. You most likely have some people working on research and will have a process for reviewing it on some regular basis. Because things can and do go wrong, you'll have some crisis plans in place for fire or employee strikes or weather. Your plans for spending capital are now planned in advance for a couple of years, rather than based on when you happen to have cash. When you are a Fortune 100 company with tens of thousands of employees, life is a bit different. You spend the entire year doing something each month related to your strategic and operating plans. You've got multiple business units spread across the country and the world. Getting everyone to use the same approach and tools for the planning process is a struggle. You'll spend a great deal more time looking at talent management and how you promote and pay people. You'll put effort into a detailed thought process for succession planning. You will detail out plans for product, capital spending, and overall finances for a minimum of 3 years, likely for 5, and maybe out for 7 to 10 years. So much of your plan and efforts will go into managing the risk to your business because you cannot afford to disappoint the stockholders and analysts and your own employees. To sum up, based on my personal experience doing strategic planning in the corporate world, combined with my work as a consultant to companies of all sizes, including startups through SCORE and the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network, I've presented 7 forces that affect companies of all sizes. We've looked briefly at the data you need in each of those areas before you put together an informed plan. We've seen how the size of your company today affects what level of detail you put into the plan and what areas you need to cover. I hope you can see how aligning these 7 forces can accelerate your business to success at the next level. Thank you for your time. Here is my contact information so you can learn more and find out how you can accelerate your business.